My name is Clara, and I'm 20 years old. If there's one thing I've known by heart since I was little, it's this. I was never good enough. At least, not in my parents' eyes. Nathan grew up in Portland, Oregon, in a family where the title of golden child had been permanently stamped on my older brother, Nathan. He's 3 years older than me, the kind of son parents love to brag about at dinner parties. Nathan just made the state physics team. Nathan got invited to a summer research program by a college professor, or even, Nathan doesn't even need to study and he still gets the highest grades. But me? I was just little Clara, the name they'd mention when someone needed an example of a daughter who isn't particularly gifted but not a failure either. I wasn't rebellious or difficult, but I was invisible. Even when I pushed myself to exhaustion just to earn my parents' approval, the only response I'd get was a dismissive nod, like they were saying, "Yeah, you did your part. Good. Now step aside for your brother." I remember my 18th birthday so clearly. While classmates were posting pictures of getting cars, smartwatches, or at least a proper dinner, I got a square box wrapped in old newspaper. Inside was a worn-out book, 10 Steps to Becoming a Useful Woman. The spine was cracked, and some pages were stained with coffee. My dad sipped his tea and said in a tone as casual as reading the weather, "Girls don't need much, as long as they're humble and don't ask for too much." I smiled, a tight-lipped smile that stung all the way to my chest. And Nathan? When he turned 18, my parents gave him a brand new, bright red Yamaha sport bike. Just days later, the whole family threw a backyard barbecue to celebrate, inviting neighbors and relatives. My mom even posted on Facebook, "So proud of our beloved son. Fly high, Mama's genius." There wasn't a single word about me the day I got my college acceptance letter. Even though I had studied on my own, applied for scholarships, and got into one of the top schools in San Diego, with a partial scholarship worth over $25,000 a year. I showed my mom, hoping, just once, her eyes would light up because of me. But all she said was, "Huh, I guess the school's easier this year. I heard a bunch of kids got in." My throat tightened like I had swallowed ice. I was used to swallowing disappointment. Once, I secretly asked my dad, "Why do you always spend so much time with Nathan and never ask how I'm doing in school?" He looked up from his newspaper and sighed. "You know why. Nathan's got potential. As for you, as long as you're doing okay, that's enough." Okay? I thought success would make them proud. But to my parents, every effort I made felt like numbers that didn't fit the equation. An equation where Nathan was always the correct answer. I enrolled at Pacific State University, nearly 1,000 miles from home. That was probably for the best. At least that far away, I wouldn't have to hear praises about Nathan every night at dinner. When I was packing, my mom stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, as if closing a deal. "You've got a scholarship, right? Good. You handle the rest. You're grown. Figure it out." I didn't expect anything. The only person who ever promised to help me was my grandmother, who used to send me handwritten letters and watercolor cards for every birthday. Even though she had Parkinson's, her handwriting remained steady, more comforting than any message my parents ever sent. She said she would help with my college living expenses. She told me, "It's not much, but enough so you won't have to live off instant noodles." I believed her. And I waited. A week, then a month. The entire first term passed, and my bank account stayed empty. I tried calling. My mom answered, her voice practically exploding. "Clara, do you think your grandmother is still sharp enough for that? She can't even remember her meals. How would she remember a promise? Don't call back about nonsense. Grow up and get real." I put the phone down, throat tight. There was no one else to ask, no one to lean on. I walked to a nearby cafe and asked for a morning barista job. Thankfully, the owner was kind and let me work weekends too. At night, I edited articles for an English website about vintage books. The pay was dirt low, but I could do it online, typing while studying. Some days, my schedule was packed from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. I'd barely have time to eat a protein bar while running between buildings. At night, I'd doze off on my laptop, eyes burning as I tried to edit spelling errors in half-finished manuscripts. Our dorm room barely fit a bunk bed, a desk, and a small, dented fridge. I shared it with Sophie, a third-year architecture student. Luckily, she was quiet but thoughtful. On nights I came back late, she would leave bananas or granola bars on my desk without a word. Sometimes, I felt grateful just because someone left me a snack. In mid-November, my laptop broke. The screen went black after a power outage. I stared at it for hours, like a kid who'd just lost their only toy. My notes, my job. Everything was in there. That night, I locked myself in the dorm bathroom, turned the water up loud so no one could hear me cry. When I came out, Sophie was waiting. She didn't ask anything. She handed me a small envelope with $500 inside and a short note. Borrowed. Not a gift. Pay me back whenever you can. I'd never owed someone so much. Not because of the amount, but because of the trust. Between two near strangers. I tracked every expense in a tiny notebook. I taped a note to my new screen, repay Sophie before winter break. Sometimes, I'd glance over at the bunk across the room, where Sophie studied with her headphones in. I never said thank you. I knew some things didn't need words. Still, things weren't always smooth. During Thanksgiving break, the cafe closed for a week. No shifts, no money for food. My dinners were crackers from the common room and tap water. I had never felt so small. That Thursday, Sophie pulled me aside and handed me a container of hot food. Eat. My mom sent too much. I opened it. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and a slice of pumpkin pie. The smell made me dizzy, not from hunger, but because someone remembered me. I looked up at Sophie. She gave a small shrug, like it didn't surprise her. We're roommates, no big deal. I laughed. A real laugh. Light and rare, in the cold winter of San Diego. That weekend, I went back to Eugene, where I grew up, for my grandmother's 80th birthday. The last time I'd been home was the previous Christmas, and I still remembered the suffocating feeling of sitting at the dinner table, listening to my parents talk about Nathan like he was some living legend, while I was just an uninvited guest. I didn't have much money for a present. After work, I cut and pasted together a little scrapbook, old family photos I dug from my hard drive, printed at the campus library, with handwritten notes under each one. I knew she liked simple, nostalgic things. The bus ride took nearly 6 hours. I held the gift on my lap the whole way, nervous and unsure. I didn't know if I still had a place in the world. My parents had built entirely around Nathan. When I arrived, the party had already started. Grandma's house glowed with lights, filled with laughter and the scent of baked apple pie. Most of the family was there, except one person. "Where's Nathan?" I asked as I greeted my mom. My mom smoothed her hair, glanced around, and replied quickly. "He's preparing for his PhD interview in Sydney. He couldn't make it, very busy." My dad, standing nearby, laughed and told Uncle Mike that Nathan was working with a top professor in Australia. His future's looking bright. I pressed my lips together. Since he went to college, I'd only received a handful of short, dry texts from him. Usually wrong links or old Netflix password requests. The party went on cheerfully. Relatives took turns giving toasts. When it was my turn, I handed Grandma the little scrapbook, my hands slightly trembling from embarrassment. Surrounded by shiny boxes, mine was just a handmade paper gift. She opened it, flipping through each page. I saw her eyes blur under the light. "Only Clara remembered me," she said hoarsely. "Even though I sent $1,500 every month, like I promised." "Wait, what?" I whispered, unable to believe what I'd just heard. "I sent it every month, into your parents' account. They told me you were very frugal, even generous enough to help Nathan pay off his student loans." I heard every word, every syllable, like cold stones crashing into me. I stood up. One question echoed in my head. What have I been surviving on for the past 2 years? My parents froze in place, completely silent. Aunt Susan covered her mouth. Uncle Mike cleared his throat, trying to redirect the mood toward the apple pie, but no one followed. I turned to my mom, my eyes burning. I never received a single dollar from Grandma. Grandma placed the scrapbook on the table and looked up, her eyes sharp, brighter than ever, untouched by Parkinson's. Hank, Melissa, she addressed my parents in a voice calm but cutting. Do you two have anything you'd like to explain? My mom turned pale. My dad stammered, maybe. There was a mix-up. A mix-up that lasted 2 years? A moment later, she stood up, gripping the armrest gently, and said softly, Everyone, please continue eating. Hank, Melissa, come into the study with me. They quietly followed, like students summoned to the principal's office. What remained in the room were spoons gently clinking against plates. There was no shouting. And Nathan? It was as if he had vanished from memory. I stayed seated, overwhelmed. In front of me was a 3-tier birthday cake, candles still flickering, but I couldn't taste any sweetness. Not because I was hungry, but because I was beginning to understand what had truly been stolen from me. Not just money, but trust. After most of the guests had left, Grandma called me into the study, a small room at the end of the hallway where she still kept her vintage typewriter and a drawer full of Grandpa's old letters. Once the door closed, she sat down in the armchair across from me. She didn't speak right away. She poured 2 cups of mint tea and slid one toward me. Clara, she began, her voice steadier than earlier, though her eyes still held unshakable disappointment. I'm sorry I didn't ask you directly sooner. Words wouldn't come. I met her gaze, feeling something collapse inside me. I've been sending money to you, she continued. $1,500 every month since you started college. But I didn't transfer it directly because I wasn't used to online banking. I asked your mother to hold the account in her name. I trusted she would pass it along to you. I gripped the hot teacup, my fingers stiffening. She studied me quietly, like she knew what I wasn't saying. Clara, you never received any of it, did you? I met her eyes and gave a quiet nod. She let out a weary sigh. I thought it was strange that you never mentioned it, but your parents always said you were saving everything, even helping Nathan, so I didn't question it. I bit my lip until I tasted blood. While I lived off dry crackers, they told her I was frugal. While Sophie lent me money to fix my laptop, they told everyone I was independent. They had repackaged my poverty into a virtuous character trait. 3 months ago, she said. I started feeling uneasy. Nathan never returned my calls, even after I left messages. And you? One time I sent a letter and you didn't reply, so I hired a personal financial consultant, someone to help review the money transfers. She pulled out a stack of papers and laid them on the table. I saw clear printed statements, my mom's name, account numbers, rows of transactions. I've sent over $70,000 to you in the past 2 years, she said slowly, plus nearly $40,000 more for living expenses. None of it, not a single cent, reached your account. I was speechless. Somewhere along the way, my fingers had let go of the cup. Clara, she looked at me, her eyes holding something new. Not just sadness, but resolve. Nathan isn't in a PhD program. He never applied. In fact, he was expelled during his sophomore year. For cheating on a midterm exam? My whole body stiffened. I'll never let you do that, she continued. He got into cryptocurrency, started with investing, then got hooked on crypto gambling. Those scammy betting sites disguised as financial platforms. He lost nearly everything I had set aside for his education. Your parents hid all of it, she said, each word slicing through the air. They used your money to bail him out of debt. They lied to preserve Nathan's image, and they let you struggle for 2 years just to protect a truth they should have faced long ago. I leaned back in the chair, the world tilting around me. Memories spun in my head. Nights of eating instant noodles, shoes with worn soles, unanswered texts asking for help. You didn't deserve this. Her voice cracked. Lady. I should have checked sooner. I trusted them too much. I'm going to handle this, she said, picking up the statements again. I don't want apologies. I want justice. For you? Just 1 week after that chaotic birthday, I got a call from Grandma. Clara, can you come with me to the lawyer's office Tuesday afternoon? I asked why, but she simply said, we're taking the steps we need to. That afternoon, she wore a gray knit coat and her old shoes. Her hands still trembled lightly from Parkinson's, but her face was sharp and clear. Inside the lawyer's office, everything was prepared. Folders, notebooks, a computer, and a middle-aged woman named Louisa Green, Grandma's legal representative. Before I could ask anything, Grandma placed her hand gently but firmly on mine. I've changed the beneficiary of my entire estate. Everything now belongs to you. I froze. You can't be serious. What about my parents? She smiled faintly, as if she had anticipated that question long ago. They've had their share for years. The Lakeview vacation home, the $150,000 invested in Nathan's startup that never filed a single financial report, and all those so-called emergency bailouts. They've used up all their credit, Clara. Louisa, the attorney, handed me a folder. Grandma had transferred over $320,000 from her savings account, ownership of her current house, and a long-term investment fund I had never heard of. What are you planning to do after this? I asked. I'm moving into a nursing home near your school, she said as casually as if she were planning a picnic. They have a neurologist, I trust? I don't want to live in this house anymore. This place where my trust was betrayed. I sprang up. You don't have to do that. I can move in and live with you. She shook her head, her gaze unwavering. Clara, you've spent too many years surviving under someone else's shadow. Now it's time to live as someone who was truly chosen, not because of comparison, but because you deserve it. I couldn't argue. Deep down, I knew she was right. I had spent too long carrying shame. Shame for being born after Nathan, for not being smart enough, loud enough, memorable enough. As we left the law office, a light rain began to fall. She held my hand while we crossed the street, her palm cold but steady. On the way back, she turned on the radio. Frank Sinatra's old voice floated softly through the car. She hummed along to a line, then turned to me and said, like it was just casual conversation, you know, when I was young, I wanted to study law. But your grandfather proposed right before the final exam. I folded that dream and never opened it again. Do you regret it? I asked. She studied me for a while, then exhaled and shook her head. No. I only regret putting my trust in the wrong hands. But now, I think I'm correcting that. A few days later, I returned to school. When I opened my locker, I found a slip of paper tucked in one of my books. Confirmation that the new semester's tuition had been paid in full. It wasn't shock that rooted me there. It was the quiet realization that I didn't have to fight anymore. But because I never imagined a day would come when I wouldn't have to figure everything out on my own. Sophie walked up, tapped lightly on my locker. Your grandma sent another package? Not cookies this time, I said. It's a whole new life. A week later, I received an email from the bank confirming I was now the official beneficiary of 3 investment accounts. One of them was named Clara's Compass Learning and Personal Development Fund. Grandma had created. It could only be used for education, travel, or launching a nonprofit project. I laughed out loud, reading the note she added. No purse shopping allowed. I'm watching. And in that fleeting moment, it felt like life was returning tiny pieces of what I had once lost. I was making coffee in the dorm kitchen when Sophie rushed in, eyes wide like she'd seen a ghost. Clara, your parents are downstairs. They're asking which room is yours. I didn't tell them. My hand froze over the coffee filter. The slow drip sounded heavy, matching the thump in my chest. I took a deep breath, wiped my hands on my shirt, and stepped out. The hallway was empty. The early spring air still carried a chill, but it wasn't as cold as what I felt when I saw them turn to face me. My mom stood against the wall, gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. My dad said nothing, eyes darting anywhere but at me. "Do you have a few minutes?" Mom asked, her voice softer than usual. I led them to my room. Sophie had discreetly disappeared, leaving just enough quiet and tension. My mom sat on Sophie's bed while my dad leaned against my desk. Both of them looked around like they were trying to find a version of me they could still control in this cramped room. "Clara," Dad started, "we know. You're angry. But Nathan's situation is really bad," Mom jumped in. "You don't know. He's been threatened. Some loan sharks came to the house." I cut her off. "Funny. I don't remember giving them our address." Dad hesitated. Mom didn't. "Clara, you need to talk to Grandma. She's acting impulsively, you know that. You've always been the calm one in this family. Please, help your brother. Just once." When I was hungry enough to eat moldy bread for 3 days, who helped me? When I cried because my laptop broke and I couldn't study or work, who asked if I was okay? Mom looked confused. "But you're the strong one. You always figured things out." I let out a bitter laugh, one so unfamiliar it startled even me. "And because I figured things out, you assumed I was a permanent source of money, didn't you?" "Don't say that." Dad spoke up, finally sounding irritated. "Then how should I say it? You took the money Grandma sent me. Not once or twice, every month, for 2 years. I don't have to guess. I've seen the statements." Mom started crying. "Nathan, he's struggling. He can't control himself. He needs saving." "I needed saving too," I said, my voice catching but steady. "I needed love. I needed protection. And every time, you chose him. Over and over again." "You're being selfish," Mom whispered. "He's still your brother." "No. I'm not being selfish. I'm protecting what little of me is left, the part neither of you ever bothered to see." Dad stepped forward, fists clenched, but he wasn't angry, just desperate. "Clara, you know your mother has a weak heart. She's on medication now. If she finds out you were behind Grandma changing her will?" I cut him off. "I don't need to hide that. If Grandma changed her will, it wasn't because of me. It was because of the truth she uncovered, and if you're looking for someone to blame, I won't carry that for you anymore." I walked over and opened the door. "I don't hate Nathan, but I won't sacrifice my life to clean up the mess you created and pinned on him." "Clara, please. I used to be the daughter who followed every rule. Not anymore." Mom cried, but I didn't budge. "I'm still your daughter, but that no longer means I have to trade my freedom for your false sense of peace." Dad lowered his head. Mom said nothing more. When they left, I closed the door, leaned against it, and let the silence settle inside me. For the first time, I felt like I was standing on my own 2 feet. No fear. No bowing my head. The very next day, I submitted my resignation for the night shifts at the cafe. Not because I was tired, but because I no longer had to live in survival mode. It wasn't about surviving anymore. No rushed exams, no sad dinners scraped from old jars. I kept my part-time job at a small bookstore near the campus library. There, I worked among shelves that smelled like old paper, under a manager named June, a woman in her 40s who had a habit of writing down the titles I liked in her personal notebook so she could gift me a paperback copy at the end of the month. The job didn't pay much, but it made me feel respected. As the financial weight gradually lifted, my mind began to clear. I got enough sleep. I ate 3 meals a day. I even had time to take walks after class, just to breathe and watch the leaves change. In just 2 months, my GPA jumped from 3.0 to 3.7. My sociology professor, Dr. Bernstein, called me over after class and handed me a small envelope. "Have you ever thought about becoming a research assistant for the department?" I almost cried in front of him. Not because the opportunity was too big, but because it was the first time someone in academia, saw me as someone with potential, not just a faint shadow behind someone else. Grandma called me every Sunday. The calls never lasted more than 30 minutes, but they made me feel connected. She never brought up my parents, never urged me to forgive, never rehashed old wounds. Just little stories, how she was learning to type again using 2 fingers, how she befriended an old man who used to teach history at Stanford, how she joined a Thursday afternoon haiku poetry club. Once I asked her, "Do you ever feel sad living in a nursing home?" She smiled softly. "Sure, but not as sad as living in a house full of people who don't see you." She continued, "I once lived in the background too. Quiet, unnoticed, assumed to be fine. I was the middle daughter, not the oldest, not the youngest. Everyone assumed I was fine, but no one ever asked if I really was." I leaned back in my chair, gripping the phone. "But you know," she said, "being forgotten doesn't mean you're worthless. Sometimes, the ones left out are the ones who know best how to listen." Sophie told me I look different lately, not in a haircut or wardrobe kind of way. "You walk straighter, hold eye contact longer, and you don't apologize anymore when someone spills water on your table." I burst out laughing, but then realized she was right. One late afternoon after my shift at the bookstore, I walked past the admin building and saw my name on a small bulletin board behind glass. Selected candidate, fall semester research assistant, sociology department. I stayed where I was, unsure whether to smile or cry. I wanted to hold on to that feeling, being recognized for what I'd built myself. Not through connections, not through luck, not out of pity, but simply because I earned it. That night, I called Grandma. Her voice was calm. "I saw it in you long ago. I waited, so you could see it too." I looked out my dorm window. San Diego skies were clear after a light rain. Somewhere deep down, I knew I was on the right path. On the last Saturday night of April, it rained lightly. I had just set my book down when the phone rang. A known number, no area code. I hesitated for a few seconds, then picked up. "Clara?" A deep, raspy voice. "It's me, Nathan." I didn't make a sound, but my chest tightened. "I'm calling from a rehab center in Reno," he said. "They asked us to call someone we've hurt, not to ask for forgiveness, just to tell the truth." There was a brief silence on the line. Then Nathan continued, "I know what you went through. I know what Mom and Dad did. I found out everything. From Grandma. And from the bank." I leaned into my chair, staring at the rain-streaked window. "I won't make excuses," Nathan said, his voice slightly shaky, but not weak. "I wasted money on garbage. I let you live through things you never deserved. I let Mom and Dad turn you into a backup plan for my failures. And no words can undo that. I used to think if this moment ever came, I'd scream or hang up. But instead, I felt a long silence that needed to be closed." Nathan took a deep breath on the other end. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but you deserve to know the truth. I know I was never worthy of being your brother. You don't have to say anything," he added quickly, as if he could read my thoughts. "You don't owe me anything, but I need to say, I'm grateful you're still here, even when no one stood with you." I slowly ended the call, saying nothing. In the room, the soft yellow light still glowed over the neatly stacked books on my shelf. Outside, the rain had stopped. A breeze drifted in through the cracked window, carrying the scent of fresh grass and cool spring air. I sat there for a while, unexpectedly light. I no longer needed that call to define who I was. I didn't need anyone to validate that what I went through was real, was heavy, was unfair. I had grown up. And I was living. Not for anyone else, not to prove anything, not waiting for a nod from people who once looked away. My phone buzzed. A text from Grandma. "My girl, don't forget your warm shoes. It'll get cold again next week." I smiled. Of course. She didn't need to say anything profound. One little reminder was enough to let me know I was loved. Not for being anyone else, but simply for being Clara. A girl who no longer lived in anyone's shadow. That night, I slept soundly. The old house didn't visit me. Neither did Nathan's retreating figure, nor the cold shape of my mother turning away. Only light ahead, and me, finally walking into it. Clara's story is a reminder that sometimes the deepest pain doesn't come from strangers, but from those we love most. But even from the place where hope seems lost, we can find ourselves again. Not through someone else's validation, but by rising on our own, living on our own, and knowing we are worthy. Clara didn't choose revenge, didn't drown in resentment, but chose to step into the light by her own strength. And that is the strongest answer to years of being overlooked. What do you think about Clara's choice? What would you do if you were in her shoes? Leave your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories about family, growth, and the lessons we learn along the way.